Reporting you. Balloons 800 or
You revealed yourself to the world through nature and your word. You're the Alpha, Omega, beginning and the end, yeah. So I will turn my affections to you. You're wonderful, so wonderful. You're the king who captured my soul.
Hello, friends, and welcome to today's edition of Thinking Clearly. As always, I'm your host, Josh Holler. To start out the program today, I just want to share a short passage of scripture from Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. As a prisoner of the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Ephesians 4:1. I believe very strongly that the scripture not only sets the stage for the story you are about to hear today, but for the story you live every day. Be worthy of your calling. To translate this from a modern-day language, it means something like this. Step up. Step up for what you have been called to do. And don't be mistaken, friends, God has a plan for each and every one of us. But we often fail to rise to the occasion, to step up and simply ask God what it is He wants of us. Be worthy of your calling because you have been called. And with that, I'd like to turn to today's program, which is featuring our youngest contributor to date, Noah Franz. Noah is a junior attending Paola High School in Paola, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City. He went to Uganda, Africa in 2010 with Ugandan Now Outreach, a ministry that focuses its efforts in southern rural Uganda. He plans to return to Uganda one day, and he is the author of an article entitled Out of Africa, Ready to Return, which can be found on the True Declination website under the October issue of 2012. In this article, Noah describes the impact of his trip to Uganda, noting the spirit and the energy of the Christians on the other side of the ocean. Though materially disadvantaged, the Ugandan church is a vigorous entity in need of support, but also capable of teaching Americans the meaning of God's call to serve His people. And with that, I'd like to turn to our guest. Noah, thank you for joining with us today to share a little bit about your experience in Uganda and the impact it had on your life.
Hi. So, basically, when I went to Uganda, it was with my family, and we were partnering up with Uganda Now Outreach. It was actually started by my older sister, Laura, and my aunt, Gail, and they both just decided to go reach out to some of the orphans and a bunch of the people over there. They've, since 2010, they've dug several wells, built several buildings over in Uganda, Africa, in a small community, the small community of Busagasi and Makindu. And so in 2010, previously in 2009, my entire family went, except for myself and my twin sister Natalie. And when they came back, they were all really changed, and I was really curious about it. So in 2010, I made the decision, and so did Natalie, to go. And it was probably one of the most eye-opening, life-changing things I've ever done. Previously, I'd never been out of the United States. I had never experienced anything like the poverty, but also just the cultural differences of another culture. I had always grown up in Kansas, never known anything except Americanism, I guess you could say. And so it really opened my eyes to just what a pretty big majority of the rest of the world lives like and looks like. And no, it's not like I've seen every single corner of the world now, because I'm sure there are lots of different places, but just to be able to get that glimpse into somewhere else really, really impacted me.
That's really interesting. I typically think when we visualize high school students that are on part-time mission trips, short-term mission trips, it's usually just to another part of the country, inner city Dallas or Denver, or to its greatest extent, perhaps to northern Mexico, Juarez, or someplace like that. But you ended up in Uganda. Could you tell our listeners a little bit how you wound up in Uganda, specifically with this organization, Uganda Now Outreach? Tell us a little bit about the nature of their work.
Yeah, like I said, it was my family had started it, my aunt and my sister, and I guess a little background, my sister Laura and Aunt Gail had really taken an interest in Africa. My aunt has always been a missionary for as long as I've been alive, and quite a bit longer than that, actually. She had been doing missionary work for several decades previously in other parts of the world, but she had never went to Africa. And so I guess Laura provided that opportunity for her to go as well. And so they both decided on Africa, and they both started looking for people in Africa who would host them. And they happened upon Deo and Christine Musisi, who became our hosts and eventually partnered up with Uganda Now and are now part of the board, I believe. And so that was year one, was in 2008, and they both went, and they saw a lot of medical missions because my aunt is an ER doctor. She works a lot in the Missouri area, and so that's where she focused on. And Laura, my sister, she basically went over there with an open heart and came back with a full one. They were both very, very heavily impacted by what they saw over there, and they were both very committed afterwards to just the people over there because they're so real and so...
They're people.
Yeah.
They're people just like
people.
us.
And they're real people just like us, and it doesn't really hit you until you can see them and feel them and talk to them and laugh with them and be with them, that they are people just like us. And it's really cool to get to experience that firsthand. And then year two, 2009, the rest of my family went. And
so this is a family thing. You really got to go over there, not just with an organization, but this organization had a huge family involvement for all of you guys.
Yes. I guess I don't think I would have gone without my family because I don't think I was really strong enough in my faith at that point, and I wasn't really secure in myself. I would have only been 13 at the time, and to go to Uganda, Africa at 13 probably wasn't pretty high up on my list. So I guess my family was a huge motivating factor for me to go. And I enjoyed it so much because I already knew the people I was going with. I didn't have to worry about, if I was going to like everyone on the team. And especially on the 2010 trip, it just seemed like everything flowed so well together. No one was at each other's throats, and I guess it just alleviated a lot of the tension already because we already knew each other.
That's great. So one of the things that people experience, so that comes as a huge shock when they go to a third world country or to just another country outside of the Western world, is they're able to experience the reality of the poverty there, or the difference or the gap in wealth or income. Was this something that you were able to witness firsthand and in those living conditions, and did that impact you, and in what way, if it did?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There cannot be enough emphasis now put on what life is like over in a third world country, what the average person experiences in their day-to-day. Even the high-end, like the upper-class people in Uganda would still be considered not so well off here in America. And when you take that into perspective, it's really easy to, I guess, empathize with the amount of intense poverty that they have over there.
Right.
One of my chief memories of being over in Uganda is riding a taxi bus full of the team down some of the streets in Makindu and up into Busagasi, right along Lake Victoria, and their roads are so horrible because the government can't afford to send streets out into the bush like that.
Right.
And as you would look out of the window, you could just see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ramshackle little mud brick huts that they've built, and sometimes those are the lucky ones. A lot of the orphans that you see don't even have that. They have maybe a grass mat and, if they're really lucky, a mosquito net, and that's basically it. And it breaks your heart because so often you don't get to see what those kids go home to every day. Home to, so to speak, because they'll just come from miles and miles around just to see a muzungu, muzungu. You're like that means white person in the native language, and you're like a celebrity over there because no one ever sees outsiders, people of wealth. It's not generally something that the wealthy people want to do, is go out into the African bush and see that kind of poverty, because I guess we don't really want to think about it. We don't want to have to deal with it, and it's something that needs to be dealt with. We take so much for granted here in America. Going to school every day, especially for the first few months after I got back, I just watched all of the kids in the high school during lunch just dumping trays full of food, and I just thought that tray of food that you just dumped would feed a child in Africa.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess in retrospect, after a few years, you start to kind of lose sight of that, but it never really goes away because the images of starving children and poverty never really gets out of your mind.
So when you were over there, you were 13 years old at the time, right?
14.
You were 14. Okay.
Yeah.
So in some capacity, the mission team that went, there was some medical missions, some dental and stuff going on. What was it that you were involved in specifically? And what is it that you could tell our listeners? It's like, hey, you can get involved. I was 14 and was able to do something too.
Mm-hmm. At the time, my sister Miriam, who was, I believe, 20 at the time, she headed the VBS, Vacation Bible School, part of the missions trip, which for the layman is basically a 3 to 4 day Christmas for the kids. The VBS part of it, which is where we take along a bunch of arts and crafts and a Bible verse and a bunch of candy. We had so much candy while we were there. And we basically just give it all to the kids, and we teach them a Bible verse. We give them a daily, Bible lesson, and then we ask them to repeat the verse back to us and give them a piece of candy. And for some of them, it's the first piece of candy they've ever had. So a lot of them didn't know to take the wrappers off. We kind of had to straighten them out on that. It was pretty funny. And then we played games, so many games, like red light, green light. They had never seen that one before. Stuff like that. And the amount of joy on their faces just from being able to be led by a Mzungu, first of all, was beyond words, really. Just to see 403, 404, I think, somewhere around there. I can't remember the exact number, but just smiling faces. Wow, really good.
So when you got back and you were around your friends for the first time, and you saw these, you had this contrast from coming from just almost total poverty to high school kids throwing away their food. What was that like, having that experience and then being around your friends who hadn't had their, for lack of better words, eyes open in the same way you had?
Well, I think in order to answer the friend question, I guess I'd have to preface it with saying that when we had gotten back into the States, we turned on the TV. And we flipped the news, and everything just sounded wrong. It was just like, why do we care about Justin Bieber and the the election, and why do we care about, the war on terror? Why are we focusing on all of this other stuff when it's right here, it's in your face, guys. Come on, let's do something about this poverty, this overriding sense of stricken horror that's going on in where we just were in Uganda. These people are real. And it was really frustrating just to watch TV for 5 minutes, because that's about all we could take. And then getting back into my circle of friends, they were interested in what I had done, but it's hard to really explain to other people how important it is, because until you see it with your own eyes, you really can't know. And no amount of emphasizing, no amount of talking about it really gets the job done well. And so there were a few conversations about it that I guess kind of tried to get people aware of, what goes on in Africa and other parts of the world. But it just wasn't a really popular subject because, as with on the news, everyone was concerned with the first world.
What would you tell listeners right now? What would you tell your friends? Here's how you can get involved. What you can tell people. There's something that needs to be done, and point them in that direction. What is that direction? Get
on Google. Really, if you spend that much time in front of a computer or on your phone, I know everybody has a cell nowadays. Get on Google and just search like third world poverty even, and there are so many wonderful organizations that pop up in the search results, and you can get plugged in with any number of those. Uganda Now, I mean, that'd be great.
What's the website for Ugandan Outreach?
www.ugandanowoutreach.org.
Awesome, that sounds great. Noah, I thank you for your time for being with us today.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you too, Josh.
Thank you. At this point, I want to point out to our audience Noah as an example of the work God can do in a young man such as this. Our authors at True Declination have spanned an age from 17 to 84, and if you consider the time that Noah was in Uganda, he was only 14. There is never a better time to follow God's call like the present. As C.S. Lewis said, the present is the closest we will get to eternity. And to our listeners, I thank you for tuning into our show. If you want to be part of our program, go to truedeclination.com. And as always, if you disagree with the comments and viewpoints expressed, we encourage you to submit a rebuttal piece to add to the discussion. All rebuttals will be carefully considered, and if published, will be featured in a counterpoint session on True Declination's podcast, Thinking Clearly. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and check out our site for new podcasts, articles, and resources to help expand Christ's kingdom. Thank you, and God bless.